What is up, everybody? We're on day 78 of our Bible in a Year series, reading through the CSB Bible in a Year. Clever name, I know. We are on the last day of Judges today. We'll be reading through Judges 19 through 21, which is the end of the chapter. And good stuff. Interesting stuff to be for sure. For the remainder of the book, and let's jump straight into it. Judges 19. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a Levite staying in a remote part of the hill country of Ephraim acquired a woman from Bethlehem in Judah as his concubine, but she was unfaithful to him and left him for her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah. She was there for 4 months. Then her husband got up and followed her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had his servant with him and a pair of donkeys. So she brought him to her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him and stayed with him for 3 days. They ate, drank, and spent the nights there. On the 4th day, they got up early in the morning and prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Have something to eat to keep up your strength, and then you can go." So they sat down, and the two of them ate and drank together. Then the girl's father said to the man, "Please agree to stay overnight and enjoy yourself." The man got up to go, but his father-in-law persuaded him, so he stayed and spent the night there again. He got up early in the morning of the 5th day to leave, but the girl's father said to him, "Please keep up your strength." So they waited until late afternoon, and the two of them ate. The man got up to go with his concubine and his servant when his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Look, night is coming. Please spend the night. See, the day is almost over. Spend the night here. Enjoy yourself. Then you can get up early tomorrow for your journey and go home." But the man was unwilling to spend the night. He got up, departed, and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. The man had his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine with him. When they were near Jebus, and the day was almost gone, the servant said to his master, "Please, why not let us stop at this Jebusite city and spend the night there?" But his master replied to him, "We will not stop at the foreign city where there are no Israelites. Let's move on to Gibeah." "Come on," he said. "Let's try to reach one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah." So they continued on their journey, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah in Benjamin. They stopped to go in and spend the night in Gibeah. The Levite went in and sat down in the city square, but no one took them into their home to spend the night. In the evening, an old man came in from his work in the field. He was from the hill country of Ephraim, but he was residing in Gibeah, where the people were Benjamites. When he looked up and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, "Where are you going? And where do you come from?" He answered him, "We're traveling from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote hill country of Ephraim, where I am from. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I'm going to the house of the Lord. No one has taken me into his home, although there's straw and feed for the donkeys, and I have bread and wine for me, my concubine, and the servant with us. There is nothing we lack." "Welcome," said the old man. "I'll take care of everything you need, only don't spend the night in the square." So he brought him to his house and fed the donkeys. Then they washed their feet and ate and drank. While they were enjoying themselves, all of a sudden, wicked men of the city surrounded the house and beat on the door. They said to the old man, who was the owner of the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so that we can have relations with him." Does this sound familiar? Maybe a callback to Genesis, possibly, with Lot and the angels. Verse 23. The owner of the house went out and said to them, "Please don't do this evil, my brothers. After all, this man has come into my house. Don't commit this horrible outrage here Let me bring out my virgin daughter and the man's concubine now. Abuse them and do whatever you want to them, but don't commit this outrageous thing against this man. Again, this sounds a lot like what we saw previously. Verse 25. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and took her outside to them. They raped her and abused her all night until morning. At daybreak, they let her go. Early that morning, the woman made her way back, and as it was getting light, she collapsed at the doorway of the man's house where her master was. When her master got up in the morning, opened the doors of the house, and went out to leave on his journey, there was the woman, his concubine, collapsed near the doorway of the house, with her hands on the threshold. Get up, he told her, let's go. There's no response. So the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. When he entered his house, he picked up a knife and took hold of his concubine, cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and then sent her throughout the territory of Israel. Everyone who saw it said, nothing like this has ever happened or has been since the day the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt until now. Think it over, discuss it, and speak up. So before we move on to chapter 20, kind of go over everything that just happened in 19. And I wanted to kind of summarize this because I think really to understand it, you need to have the entire chapter, right? I mean, you can try to explain it, but I think it's going to be easier to explain and understand with the entire chapter's context. So what we saw in 19 started off with a time when Israel had no king, right? And everyone would just do what they thought was good in their own eyes. This is to show the level of moral decay and just complete indecency on really everyone's part. Now, I think it's important to know this is where it's important to know the distinction between prescriptive and descriptive text. Now, just because the Bible is talking about something that happened doesn't mean that it approves of the thing that happened. This is one of those instances. This is not a good thing by any means, right? Nobody really is in the right here. Now we're going to see there is coming up a response to what happened, but no one is really on the good side here, at least not at the moment. So there's a lot there as far as the moral decay of the community, the cities of Israel overall. And this would also have served as a warning to Israel on what happens if you get away from God's law, God's instruction, what God has told us to do. So this is showing that this is ultimately what happens when you get away from God's plan. And I think we see that in our society today. So, chapter 20. All the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came out, and the community assembled as one body before the Lord at Mizpah. The leaders of all the people and all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 armed foot soldiers. The Benjamites heard the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah. The Israelites asked, tell us, how did this evil act happen? The Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, answered, I went to Gibeah in Benjamin with my concubine and spent the night. Citizens of Gibeah came to attack me and surrounded the house at night. They intended to kill me, but they raped my concubine and she died. Then I took my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout Israel's territory, because they have committed a wicked outrage in Israel. Look, all of your Israelites, give your judgment and verdict here and now. So this is we'll get back. Then all the people stood united and said, "None of us will go to his tent or return to his house. Now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will attack it. By lot we will take 10 men out of every 100 from all the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of every 1,000, and 1,000 out of every 10,000, to get provisions for the troops when they go to Gibeah, and Benjamin to punish them for all the outrage they committed in Israel." So this cutting her up and sending her to the tribes has rallied the rest of the tribes of Israel. Now it's sad that it took this long, that it took this this thing happening to do it, but it has rallied them against the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, verse 11. So all the men of Israel gathered united against the city. Then the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What is this evil act that has happened among you? Hand over the wicked men in Gibeah, so we can put them to death and purge evil from Israel." But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. Instead, the Benjamites gathered together from their cities to Gibeah to go out and fight against the Israelites. On that day, the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 armed men from their cities, besides 700 fit young men rallied by the inhabitants of Gibeah. There were 700 fit young men who were left-handed among all these troops. All could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. The Israelites, apart from Benjamin, mobilized 400,000 armed men, every one an experienced warrior. They set out, went to Bethel, and inquired of God. The Israelites asked, "Who is to go first to fight for us against the Benjamites?" The Lord answered, "Judah will be first." In the morning, the Israelites set out and camped near Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin and took their battle positions against Gibeah. The Benjamites came out of Gibeah and slaughtered 22,000 men of Israel on the field that day. But the Israelite troops rallied and again took their battle positions in the same place where they positioned themselves on the first day. They went up, wept before the Lord until evening, and inquired of him, "Should we again attack our brothers, the Benjamites?" And the Lord answered, "Fight against them." On the second day, the Israelites advanced against the Benjamites. The same day, the Benjamites came out from Gibeah to meet them and slaughtered an additional 18,000 Israelites on the field. All were armed. The whole Israelite army went to Bethel, where they wept and sat before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. Then the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days, the ark of the covenant of God was there, and Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, was serving before it. The Israelites asked, "Should we again fight against our brothers?" "Should we again fight against our brothers, the Benjamites, or should we stop?" The Lord answered, "Fight, because I will hand them over to you tomorrow." So Israel set up an ambush around Gibeah. On the third day, the Israelites fought against the Benjamites and took their battle positions against Gibeah as before. Then the Benjamites came out against the troops and were drawn away from the city. They began to attack the troops as before, killing about 30 men of Israel on the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah through the open country. The Benjamites said, "We are defeating them as before." But the Israelites said, "Let's flee and draw them away from the city to the highways." So all the men of Israel got up from their places and took their battle positions at Baal Tamar, while the Israelites in ambush charged out of their places west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 fit young men from all Israel made a frontal assault against Gibeah, and the battle was fierce, but the Benjamites did not know that disaster was about to strike them. The Lord defeated Benjamin in the presence of Israel. And on that day, the Israelites slaughtered 25,100 men of Benjamin. All were armed. Then the Benjamites realized they had been defeated. That sounds like defeat to me. The men of Israel had retreated before Benjamin because they were confident in the ambush that they had set against Gibeah. The men in ambush had rushed quickly against Gibeah. They advanced and put the whole city to the sword. The men of Israel had a prearranged signal with the men in ambush. When they set up a great cloud of smoke from the city, the men of Israel would return to the battle. When Benjamin had begun to strike them down, killing about 30 men of Israel, they said, they're defeated for us just as they were in the first battle. But when the column of smoke began to go up from the city, Benjamin looked behind them, and the whole city was going up in smoke. Then the men of Israel returned, and the men of Benjamin were terrified when they realized that disaster had struck them. They retreated before the men of Israel toward the wilderness. But the battle overtook them, and those who came out of the cities slaughtered those between them. They surrounded the Benjamites, pursued them, and easily overtook them near Gibeah. Toward the east, there were 18,000 men who died from Benjamin. All were warriors. Then Benjamin turned and fled toward the wilderness to Rimmon Rock. And Israel killed 5,000 men on the highways and overtook them at Gidom, and struck 2,000 more dead. All the Benjamites who died that day were 25,000 armed men. All were warriors, but 600 men escaped into the wilderness to Rimmon Rock and stayed there 4 months. The men of Israel turned back against the other Benjamites and killed them with their swords, the entire city, the animals, and everything that remained. They also burned all the cities that remained. Okay. Intense stuff. And this is really the first time that we see a kind of a stance of one tribe against another. We did have a little bit with Deuteronomy, I believe. No, Numbers. It was more of a misunderstanding than anything else. But yeah. So last chapter 21. The men of Israel had sworn an oath to Mizpah. None of us will give his daughter to a Benjamite in marriage. So the people went to Bethel and sat there before God until evening. They wept loudly and bitterly and cried out, "Why, Lord God of Israel, has it occurred that one tribe is missing in Israel today?" The next day the people got up early, built an altar there, and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. The Israelites asked, Who of all the tribes of Israel didn't come to the Lord with the assembly? For a great oath had been taken that anyone who had not come to the Lord at Mizpah would certainly be put to death. But the Israelites had compassion on their brothers, the Benjamites, and said, Today a tribe has been cut off from Israel. What should we do about the wives for the survivors? We've sworn to the Lord not to give them any of our daughters as wives. They asked which city among the tribes of Israel didn't come to the Lord at Mizpah. It turned out that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp and the assembly. For when the roll was called, no men were there from the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead. The congregation sent 12,000 brave warriors there and commanded them, Go and kill the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the sword, including women and dependents. This is what you should do. Completely destroy every male, as well as every woman who has gone to bed with a man. They found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not been intimate with a man, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh in the land of Canaan. The whole congregation sent a message of peace to the Benjamites who were at Rimmon Rock. Benjamin returned at that time, and Israel gave them the women they had kept alive from Jabesh Gilead, but there were not enough for them. The people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made his gap in the tribe of Israel. The elders of the congregation said, What should we do about the wives for those who are left, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed? They said, "There must be heirs for the survivors of Benjamin, so that a tribe of Israel will not be wiped out. But we can't give them our daughters as wives, for the Israelites had sworn, anyone who gives a wife to Benjamin is cursed." They also said, "Look, there's an annual festival to the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebanah." Then they commanded the Benjamites, "Go and hide in the vineyards. Watch, and when you see the young women of Shiloh come out to perform the dances, each of you leave for the vineyards and catch a wife for yourself from the young women of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. When their fathers or brothers come to us and protest, we will tell them, 'Show favor to them, since we did not get enough wives for each of them in battle. You didn't actually give the women to them, so you are not guilty of breaking your oath.'" The Benjamites did this and took the number of women they needed from the dancers they caught. They went back to their own inheritance, rebuilt their cities, and lived in them. At that time, each of the Israelites returned from there to his own tribe and family. Each returned from there to his own inheritance. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him. Okay, that is the reading. That is the end of Judges, and that is for today, except for our questions. So let's jump to it. Question 1. Shocking events of Judges 19. I think I said Genesis earlier instead of Judges. That's the end of Judges. Question 1. The shocking events of Judges 19 reveal a society without restraint. What do you think drives people to such extremes when they reject God's guidance? I think all morality is built on God. Without God, anything is permissible. Without God, you can literally justify anything because it's solely based on what you want and how you feel. Now, you may not like it, but that's true. That's how it is. You don't really have something else, because without some type of a moral framework, your morals are just subjective feelings. Question 2. The near destruction of Benjamin in chapters 20 through 21 shows the cost of division. How can we work toward unity and reconciliation in our own communities? Well, I think first, it's clear that God was behind them in going after Benjamin, right? So that part is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think reconciliation can happen only if there is really genuine repentance. Has to be genuine repentance. And division isn't necessarily a bad thing. We want to divide from things that are bad or unholy or wicked or sinful, right? But the purpose of that division, we see this, Paul writes later, the purpose of the division is to bring them back into the fold. So even in division, there's an ultimate purpose of bringing them back to salvation. Question 3. The phrase, "there was no king in Israel," repeats in these chapters. How does this longing for leadership point us to our need for God's authority in our lives? So this is, like I said, I think before I got to chapter 20, it says there's no God in Israel here. It says that everyone did whatever they saw fit in their own eyes. And so it's this idea that there's no leadership. And everyone's just doing whatever they want to do. There's no accountability. There's no leadership. There's no real responsibility to speak of. And that is not good. This is why, for us, we need to put the leadership God has established, namely himself, as number one above everything else. This is why we also need to respect the authorities that are here on earth that have been given to us from God. So this is why it's important to get into a church and submit yourself under a local pastor. right? You don't have to agree with everything, but you need to submit under a local pastor. Not just kind of doing it on your own, just whatever you feel like doing. That is 100% a guaranteed way to fall into some really, really terrible stuff. Always, every time. So that's it for today. Appreciate everyone watching, listening up to this point. Still, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, help the channel grow. If this has been a blessing to you, consider spreading the word. Word of mouth is the best way the podcast spread. So if it's been a blessing to you, you can share that with others as well. Don't go anywhere. Tomorrow, we'll be getting back, but we're going to do the book of Ruth. We're going to do the entire book in one day. It's 4 chapters, the entire book in one day, and it'll be good. Interesting book. So thanks. God bless.